As America is marking its 250th anniversary, we're taking a closer look at what Savannah was like during the Revolution. WSAV's Ben Singer joining us now with a look back to colonial times.
It really is a fascinating story, Tina. So Georgia was the youngest colony and not a major player in the overall war, but we did have a very significant battle here. I talked with Dr. Stan Deaton at the Georgia Historical Society all about it. What was Savannah like in that year?
We'd be sitting in the forest right here,
Right.
Because the southern boundary of the city was probably Liberty Street in 1776. We know that in part because when the British tried to defend the city from the Americans in 1779, Liberty Street was the southern boundary that the Americans had to get past. It was a city that didn't look much like what we see today. The squares would have been there up to a point, but not in the way that we see them now. There wouldn't have been monuments. Right. There might have been wells or springs in the middle of them. It was still a frontier town, and it was a port city. So there's a lot going on down on what we think of today as River Street and Bay Street, which would have been the commercial center, and Broughton Street would have been the commercial center of the town. There's a reason that very little from the 18th century survives, in part because we had a fire in 1796 that took out much of the wooden buildings. But the city itself, the blueprint was there for what it would become, and thank God they followed it and kept the squares intact as the city expanded southward, but it didn't look much like it does now.
So when we talk about the Siege of Savannah, our inclination would be to think it was a successful battle because we won the war.
Yeah.
So do you think you're kind of always correcting that sort of part of it? Like, actually, this was a significant battle, but it was a losing battle.
It was a losing battle, and to be clear, the British held the city of Savannah, and they held it right through the negotiations after Yorktown, when the American diplomats were in Paris negotiating with the British. The British were still sitting in Charleston, they were still sitting in Savannah, and they were still sitting in New York. And there were people who were afraid that particularly Savannah was going to be negotiated away. It didn't happen, and the British eventually just sailed away on July 11th, 1782.
So when we also talk about the Revolution here, we talk about Casimir Pulaski. Is that how you say it? So who is he?
So he's a Polish nobleman who decided, like a lot of Europeans, that there was opportunity for military glory in the American Revolution. And he got a commission, and he came over, and he was serving with Washington in the campaigns in Pennsylvania, and he came south. So he was here, father of the American cavalry, as he's known, and he was here on that morning, October 9, 1779, and he was in the front lines of one cavalry charge right into the teeth of a pretty ferocious artillery barrage, and he took a grape shot, which we have here at the Georgia Historical Society, that was dug out of his groin, about the size of a golf ball, and it took him down, and he lingered for a few days and died. And as you probably know, there was sort of controversy for years as to where exactly he was buried. Was he buried at sea? Was he buried out at Greenwich Plantation? They had dug up a body out there in the 19th century and brought it here and buried that under a monument in Monterey Square. And so in the late 20th century, as that monument was being restored, they exhumed that body, and it took many, many years of DNA evidence, but they did finally prove that in fact it was the body of Casimir Pulaski. So he lies there still in Monterey Square, the father of the American cavalry.
So when we talk about revolutionary sites, what are sort of the must-dos for somebody who wants to maybe see some of that stuff in person, even if it's just in honor? We have the Redoubt that is in Tricentennial Park.
That's probably the number one place that I would go as a site where I think you can feel the ground beneath your feet as really being, it takes you back to that period. The house where the governor lived is where the Telfair Mansion is now, and the Telfair Museum, but the original building is not there. You can walk down Broughton Street. You can go down on River Street, and I think if you let your imagination take you, you can imagine, because that's the oldest part of our city. That's the part that was tied to the river, which tied us to the world, which is what Savannah was. It was and is a port city.
Now that is just part of our conversation. We got 40 more minutes for you. So we also talk about history of the Georgia Historical Society and what they are working on these days to commemorate America 250. The whole thing is streaming right now on WSAV+. You can also find it on the homepage of our website, WSAV.com, right now. We'll be right back.